Jesus was crucified at 9 o'clock in the morning, and these trials happened in the middle of the night. He was actually tried 6 times. There were 3 Jewish trials by Annas, Caiaphas, and the Sanhedrin, and there were 3 Roman trials by Pilate, Herod, and Pilate. Now, 6 is the number of man in the Bible. And there is going to be a 7th trial one day. It's called the Great White Throne Judgment in Revelation 20, verse 11. And let me tell you that God is going to be on that throne. This is what it says in Revelation 20. It says, "I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And one day Annas, Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin, Pilate, and Herod, they will all stand before God at the 7th trial." Now Pilate said to Jesus, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he answered him, "Not one word," so that the governor marveled greatly. Now, why did Jesus say not one word? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because Jesus wasn't guilty at all, but in our place, he was guilty. So that's why he said nothing in his defense. Now we're going to look at this terrible Roman scourging. Pilate, it says in John chapter 19, Pilate took Jesus and had him scourged. They used a Roman flagrum on the left there, which is an instrument, a very nasty instrument, and it's designed to basically take all the skin off the person being scourged. That's what it was for. Very, very nasty indeed. They would actually tie the person being scourged upright with hands raised probably above the heads, using handcuffs or ropes or something like that. Jesus was draped over this pillar like that, and he was actually completely naked. Now, I do have a separate teaching on the Shroud of Turin, which I'm quite certain is the real thing. And if you look very carefully at those 2 images on the right there, you can see all those scourge marks of Jesus on the front, on the back. Not just on the back, but also down the back of the legs, and also the front of the legs and the front of the chest wall. Basically, Jesus' skin was basically taken completely off. There were actually 2 soldiers, one on each side. You can work that out from the cross, from the images on the right-hand side. You can see all those scourge marks there. The number of lashes that Jesus was given was 120. Now, in Roman times, they normally gave only 39. That was the law, but in the case of Jesus, he had 120 of them, and that's probably why he was so very weak and why he died in only 6 hours, instead of quite commonly it took many days, or it could actually take up to 9 days, but commonly it took 3 days. If you remember that Jesus carried a heavy cross on the way to a heavy crossbeam on the way to crucifixion. It weighed probably about 100 pounds, and he was so weak after this scourging, he couldn't carry it. They also pulled off Jesus' beard. And those are the blood marks left on the Shroud of Turin after pulling off his beard. You can also see the blood coming down from the crown of thorns. It says in Isaiah 50, "I gave my back to the smiters and my cheeks to them that plucked off the hair. I hid not my face from shame and spitting." Now remember, Jesus hadn't drunk any fluid since the night before the Last Supper, and his body was shredded with muscle and subcutaneous tissue exposed. His beard had been pulled out, and he would already have been severely dehydrated in the early stages of cardiorespiratory collapse. We're going to look now at the crown of thorns and the mocking of Jesus. Now Jesus had this crown of thorns, which is made from the lote bush, which grows wild all over the Middle East, actually, and was probably growing in the Praetorium. In fact, they were probably burnt clumps of it, just to keep warm. Anyway, one of the soldiers grabbed some of this and just made a sort of a clump and put it on Jesus' head. It describes in Matthew 27 how the soldiers of the procurator took Jesus into the Praetorium, and plating a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed into his right hand. And bending the knee, they mocked him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spat on him and took the reed and kept striking him on the head. Well, you can actually work out that there are over 70 lacerations on Jesus' scalp from this crown of thorns. So his beard had been ripped off, there was severe bleeding from his face, severe bleeding from his scalp from the crown of thorns, there was laceration over his right orbit from punching and beating with rods. He had a fractured nasal cartilage from beating with rods and bruising over both cheek from the punches. The crown of thorns wasn't actually a crown, it was just a clump of bushes made of this lote bush. It's made from the Ziziphus spina Christi, which you can see has long barbs about 2 inches long. And you can see the blood tracking down there. Now the crowd chose Barabbas rather than Jesus. This is actually very important because it's a type of the gospel. You see, Barabbas in Hebrew means son of the Father. In the case of Barabbas, he was the son of Satan because he was a murderer. And Jesus said in John 8:44 to priests, he said, "You are of your father the devil." Now Barabbas was a murderer, we're told that in Mark 15, and he was actually a son of the devil. And as far as Barabbas was concerned, there was an extraordinary exchange. The son of Satan, Barabbas, went free, and the Son of God died in his place. That is a perfect picture of the gospel of Jesus. Then Jesus carried the cross to Golgotha, the place of the execution, and the cross used during Jesus' time was what's called a low tow cross made of 2 parts. The crossbeam, which the prisoner carried, that's the patibulum, and the stipes crucis, which was already fastened to the ground. So Jesus actually carried that heavy crossbeam, weighing about 100 pounds, strapped to his arms like that, and he took it to the place of crucifixion, where the nails were driven in. I'll tell you how that happened, but the upright was already in place, the stipes crucis. And the Shroud of Turin shows a wide area of bruises on each shoulder. The patibulum weighed about, as I say, between 80 and 100 pounds, and there's lots of bruising over both shoulder blades, and you can see that on the Shroud of Turin. And Jesus actually fell while carrying that heavy crossbeam, and the shroud does show he sustained fractured nasal cartilages and laceration to the left knee. That probably happened when he fell. And also, by the way, when he fell, he picked up from some stone which is only found in Jerusalem. It's called calcium aragonite. Now we're going to talk about the actual crucifixion of Jesus Christ. That is actually probably not an accurate picture of exactly what happened. I mean, it was a very gory business. By the way, the Romans had soldiers who did nothing else but crucify people. That's all they did. Basically, what probably happened is that they, first of all, nailed Jesus' hands, wrists, I should say, to the crossbeam, and then used probably horses to drag the patibulum, the crossbeam, up to the stipes crucis. That actually is the place of the skull, Golgotha, just north of Jerusalem near the Damascus Gate. It says in Luke 23, and when they came to the place called the skull, they crucified him there, and the robbers, one on his right hand and the other on his left. So the crossbeam, as I said, was quite separate from the stipes crucis, and they put these long nails in. They were probably about 12 inches long and half an inch wide. You only needed 3 nails to crucify a person, and that is actually the correct anatomical position. You can see there that in this case the palms are against the wood of the patibulum with the thumbs pointing down. It's actually quite different from everything you've ever heard before, but that actually is the correct position according to the blood flow which you can see on the Shroud of Turin. The correct place for the nail was not in the palms of the hands, but actually in the wrists. They've done experiments with dead bodies, and they show that if you put a nail through the palm of the hands, it just simply tears through the flesh there. No, the actual nail went through a little place in in all of our wrists, which you actually feel right now if you want to. Just feel the back of your wrist, you can feel a little dent there, and that's what those Roman soldiers look for. It's called Desdot's point. And they put these long nails right through Desdot's point. So Jesus was stripped naked and laid on the ground, and the soldiers stretched out his arms, and both wrists were nailed to the crosspiece, the patibulum, and they went straight through the median nerves in the wrists. Now, some of you might have damaged your elbow just by knocking it, and you know what terrible